Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study of the book of Galatians. And we have just in chapters 3 and 4 seen Paul address the false teaching of the Judaizers, these Christians who are telling Gentile Christians they have to keep the law of Moses to be pleasing to God, particularly that the men have to be circumcised. He has addressed them in the in the most powerful way he can, using rabbinic reasoning, which is what they'd use to convince them otherwise. It's not a tool that he uses frequently, but it's certainly the tool that is the most powerful in his tool belt, just from his background, his training, because he was the brightest pupil of the greatest rabbinic teacher of his age. And we get to see that, and we have gotten to see that in these last 2 chapters. Well, that he's through reasoning that way, and now he's teaching like Jesus. We're going to look at chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. In verses 1 through 5, these verses, you could pull any of them and insert any of them into the Sermon on the Mount or any of Jesus' teachings, and it would sound exactly like Jesus had said it, just completely full of common sense, straightforward, unarguable. It's just the way Jesus taught. Jesus did not litigate an issue to death. He presented the truth in its clarity, and its purity, and that's exactly what Paul's going to do. And then in verses 10 through 12, we're going to see that he's still pretty worked up about the fact this congregation he was at just a short time ago has gone south so quickly. Chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. It was for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore keep standing firm, and do not be subject again to the yoke of slavery. Behold, I, Paul, say to you that if you receive circumcision, Christ will be of no benefit to you. I testify again to every man who receives circumcision that he is under obligation to keep the whole law. And he's not talking about anyone who circumcises an infant son. He's talking about grown men who are trying to keep the law of Moses, even though it doesn't apply to them, even though it's been fulfilled in Jesus Christ. If this is what you want, you're choosing this over Jesus, he says, and it will benefit you nothing because you're signing on to serve the whole law, which no one has ever been able to do. You have been severed from Christ. Play on words there a bit, don't you think? You who are seeking to be justified by the law have fallen from grace. For we through the Spirit by faith are waiting for the hope of righteousness. In Christ, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision means anything, but faith working through love. You were running well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? This persuasion did not come from him who calls you. A little leaven leavens the whole lump of dough. Who have we heard use that proverb before? Jesus himself used it. In fact, Paul uses it multiple times. Paul uses it negatively to mean a bad influence. A small bad influence can ruin something really good. Jesus in Matthew chapter 13 said that the kingdom of heaven was like a lump of leaven that a woman kneaded into an entire, or a piece of leaven that a woman kneaded into a lump of dough, and it transformed the whole lump. But we see him using the same phrases, the same epigrams, the same style of teaching that Jesus uses. It's this clear, it's this simple, it's one way or the other. And we'll continue to see him do that. Also, we'll get to see him for a brief moment put on his philosopher's cap and be a Greek philosopher, because they are Greeks, by the way, Gentiles, by the way, trained in Greek thought, and we'll see him demonstrate his facility with all three styles of teaching: the rabbinic style, Jesus style, and then the pedantic, the philosophic style of that they would have been familiar with from their own school days. So anyway, we see that. And then in 10, I have confidence in you in the Lord that you will adopt no other view, but the one who is disturbing you shall bear his judgment, whoever he is. He's not naming names. Although, when he says whoever he is, Don't we suspect that he knows who this goes back to? But I, brethren, and he will name someone a little later on. Well, strongly allude to someone later on. But I, brethren, if I still preach circumcision, why am I still persecuted? Then the stumbling block of the cross has been abolished. I would that those who are troubling you should even castrate themselves. Well, actually, he says mutilate themselves, but we know what he means. Okay, he is going to be from here on out pressing some buttons, some psychic buttons in their minds. The Jews circumcised their children as a sign of the covenant. Gentiles did not. A Greek, a Roman, would have thought of that as a mutilation. They would have. They would have thought of it as something that was that barbaric people, underdeveloped people, rustic people would do in their weirdness. They would never do that. They called it mutilation. That's what they called it. And in attaching that to circumcision and in using their word for the practice, this Jewish practice, he is going even deeper than those false teachers were going in pressing the psychic buttons that they have inside their head. So that's going on as the subtext of this. But the text is so straightforward and clear. You've got a choice to make. You can't keep the law and be a Christian. You can't find your salvation in the law and be a Christian. If you're a Jew and you want to keep the law as part of your Christianity, that's one thing. But you Gentiles, in choosing to observe the law, you're rejecting Jesus Christ. He did not die on the cross so that you could serve the law of Moses. He died on the cross so that we could be free from sin altogether. And the Mosaic law was never effective against sin. It was utilitarian. It was given to a certain people for a certain amount of time to bring about the fullness of time when Jesus Christ can come. His words, chapter 4, the fullness of time, by the way. And so why would you go back? And he says, I have confidence in you that you're not going to go back. Does he have a lot of confidence in him? He's called them foolish. Well, yes and no. I mean, he's upset, but I think he has confidence that they're going to respond to his letter and that they're not going to be long in indulging this false teaching. Wow. And then he says, I wish that he's talking about fellow Christians who are teaching falsehood. But he's talking about fellow Christians here. I would that those who are troubling you would even mutilate themselves. if they're so gung ho, why don't they just finish the job? I'm not trying to be indelicate. I'm just saying what he's saying. And using that word mutilation, it was so packed with content, cultural content, when he used that word. And he's using every tool available to him, both in the text of his words and the subtext of his words, to yank them free of these false teachers. Okay, we'll pick up with verse 13 next time. Thank you so much for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.